Great. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you back here after I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I had a very restful Thanksgiving. I had COVID, so I just slept through my Thanksgiving, but it was very restful, which is good. So we're very excited to talk about this letter, the third letter or the third catechesis on old age. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. I think there's a lot of it that's really practical to what's happening in the world today. And I don't know, Amanda, I don't know if you have any initial thoughts before we dive in.
Feel free, take it away, Nicole.
Okay, so one of the things that really struck me, well, there's a couple of things that really jumped out at me from this is, first of all, this whole idea of not avoiding the injustice around us, like that we look it in the face and we call it out and we react with calling for justice and charity. And I think just thinking about everything that's happened in the world over the past 10 days has really hit me like, wow, like this is really a call for today. But one sentence that I wanted to start with is, I'm just going to read it. The special sensibility of us old people of old age, I guess that means us, me, Amanda, not you, for the attention, thoughts, and affections that make us human should once again become the vocation of the many. And I just thought that was so interesting that he recognizes, that the Pope recognizes that as we get older, some of those things that, like, when you're young, you have this bucket list, I'm going to finish school and I'm going to buy a car and I'm going to buy a house and I'm going to do all these things. And then at a certain point, you've done all those things and then you have to make a paradigm shift. So you can't just think about successes. You have to focus to significance, like what's significant, what are the significant relationships, how do you really be human? And I think that is something that older people can really speak into this world, that calling all of us to recognize what makes us more human and to focus on the humanity of everyone. And I think that is something that we've been really challenged with this week, I would say. Anyway, so Amanda, what are your thoughts? And I know that, okay, sorry, go ahead. I'm not going to preempt you.
There's so much here as usual. And I think one of the main threads that I'd like to identify is this theme of enjoyment and corruption. He says, when the perception of corruption is lost and corruption becomes something normal, everything has its price, everything. And he goes on to talk about, just before, Jesus stresses the fact that when human beings limit themselves to enjoying life, they lose even the perception of corruption, which mortifies dignity and poisons meaning. So that a pure, sheer enjoyment of life poisons a meaningful existence. And I think that's so interesting because the enjoyment of life could, at first glance, seem like a kind of existential richness. But in fact, it can be a form of existential poverty when the enjoyment of life is at the expense of that perception of what is kind of the havoc and destruction in the world. And so that there's a kind of responsibility to stay attuned to reality, as you alluded to at the beginning, in order to not coast through life, which then sucks out that significance you were speaking about, that comes only with a very meaning-filled life, which has a cost to it, which summons something from us that's not always comfortable.
Yeah, no, I really like that you brought that up. So yesterday we're celebrating a family birthday, and so we go around the table and share a memory of that person or something that really strikes us about that person. And it would happen to be my daughter-in-law, and over again, people were just saying how she had inspired them through this past year with all the kind of things she'd been struggling with and stepping up and the challenges she had in her life. And I think that is something that we often find is that when we are challenged, we stretch and we actually grow and we become better people, even though maybe it's not so comfortable.
I agree with that.
Sorry, I'm just going to mute people so that we can not get too much feedback. Oh, did I mute? Oh, sorry, Amanda, I unmuted you. I'm gonna unmute you.
All right, and just
sorry.
we should have a little bit of a preamble. We're diving right
Yeah.
in, and yet with the age to age series, we do say you can drop in, and so I know we do have some new ones joining us, so welcome. What we do in this age to age series is we dive right in to the text by Pope Francis. Nicole and I initially react to it, put some preliminary remarks on the table, and then we open it up for a discussion with all of you. And so think of what you want to share. Think of your own anecdotes that come to mind in light of this reading, whether you've read it or whether something that Nicole or I share strikes you, feel free to chime in. So we will move to that portion. We just start with this little preliminary whetting of the appetite with a few key lines and a few stories from our own lives in order to set the tone before we move to you. And we really look forward to sharing the conversation together.
Yeah, one thing actually, just jumping off on that, because this is something I want to talk about because it kind of has struck me this week. Speaking with, I have a friend who's quite a bit older than me. We're just talking about, her husband had a big health scare, and so she's dealing with this idea of, at some point I'm going to become a widow, and just working through all of that when you really love someone, you also carry with it the point in time in your life when one of you is going to be wounded because the other person is going to leave you behind. And it made me think a lot about that widows group that you went to. And I just thought maybe you would like to talk about that, because it really kind of goes to speaking, I think, love into the culture and talking about what makes us human.
That's right. And actually how you kind of raise that reminds me of one of the readings that we use in the bioethics symposium for medical students from Viktor Frankl. And it's about the concept of man in psychotherapy. And he starts off by telling the story of how there was a patient who was very distressed. He was so much feeling a really strong depression because of the loss of his wife. And the doctor said, well, what would have happened if you died first? And he said, well, that would have been terrible. Then my wife would have felt what I feel, would have been grieving for me, and would have felt all this anguish that I now experience in her absence. And then the doctor said, well, you see, by surviving your wife, you actually have the opportunity to make a sacrifice. Like, your surviving your wife gives you the opportunity to love so much deeper, because you realize that it can take on the form of a sacrifice, because she doesn't bear the grief. You instead bear it as the surviving one from the marriage. And so I just thought that was such an interesting example of turning something around that is a difficult cross to bear, but then transforming the mystery into meaning. So yeah, on the other night, I had the opportunity to go to the Widows Ministry monthly potluck at a local parish in my hometown. And I had seen a sign in the church that said Widow and Widowers Ministry. And I was quite taken by this, because it only occurred to me a few months ago that whenever I hear widows and orphans in the Bible, I think, oh, that sounds kind of anachronistic. Like, do we still have those almost? But of course, everyone who is married, and then very often one spouse dies before the other, then there are lots of widows and widowers. And then children, when their parents die, become orphans. And so this kind of ubiquitousness of these human experiences, combined with the sort of juxtaposition of how the words almost seem antiquated, really struck me. So I met the person who 10 years ago founded the Widows Ministry at this parish, and I asked her about what led her to establish it. And I was very moved by how she, in her own experience, was able to create this group that she specifically and emphatically says is not a grief group. It's not a members may be grieving, but the group is not primarily focused on grief. It's focused on sharing the journey of life together in community. And she just realized one of the key things that people miss when a spouse dies is sharing meals together. So they started having a potluck once a month in the parish, and time after time, there became more and more embellishments to these evenings with tablecloths and wine and a beautiful spread for the potluck and things like introductions where everyone stands and shares how long they've been a widow. And then there's this just beautiful time of sharing where I left during this portion, but I know that those who are there have sort of small group discussions and can really share of their own experience quite intimately. So to my mind, this just struck me as an incredible witness of sort of taking care of widows and widowers, of rising to the occasion to meet people and journey alongside them in their grief. It was just, to me, struck me as how to be a widow, like the quintessential way to live this season of life that so many experience, widow and widowers. And yeah, so I was just really, really touched by that. And I think hopefully we can find more things like that in the culture that are exemplary, so we can pinpoint them, because a big reason why people might be asking for euthanasia is they don't have a monthly potluck supper to go to. They don't have someone sending them a card after they have bad fall and they're living on their own. They don't have someone to remember their birthday and celebrate that they've just turned 90. Things like this that I saw all on display in the Widow and Widowers Ministry group at the parish. So yeah, it was very moving, very stirring for me.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to just jump off that. I'm preparing a talk and doing some research, and at Sunnybrook in Toronto, they did a retrospective on 2 years of people who'd been euthanized, and 48% of those people lived alone, compared to 28% in the general population. And of those people that were euthanized, most of them had no close relationships. So it is this loneliness, this isolation that is driving people to choose to be euthanized. And we're seeing, I mean, we know the stats for last year still have not been released, but I'm understanding that they're very, very high. And so I think one of our friends who does a lot of research in this area thinks that euthanasia will be the 4th leading cause of death in Canada next year.
Yeah, and I think that it's probably on par. The number of euthanasia deaths since legalization pretty much equals the number of COVID deaths. It's about 50,000 for each. And so that is really, really shocking and crushing. So hopefully that data will be released. We are watching closely, and it has been delayed and delayed and delayed again. But if we know that 31,000 Canadians were killed by doctors and nurses between 2016 and 2021, and we know that the numbers are rising, and it was 10,000 in the previous year, then it easily amounts to a commensurate number with the number of COVID deaths. So just, yeah, devastating numbers, but this is why we give so much attention to it right now.
Yeah, so I think just on that note, like the whole idea of building community, and that the Pope in this particular letter is saying that people who are older, us elderly, have an opportunity to speak to the younger people about what's important. And I think that's something I see with my own children and their friends, being able to talk to them about what are the real important things in life, and focusing on the relationships in your life, and not spending so much time focusing on the comfort things, I would say.
Yeah, I was really struck, especially during the years that I studied both in Poland and in Italy, going to masses and seeing the morning masses filled with many elderly people. It can be the same in Canada, but I guess just especially there, the thought came to me that, like, what are they doing? It was kind of mysterious to me, like all these really old people coming to mass every day so faithfully. Either they're bored and they have nothing else to do, or they've figured something out and their life has an orientation and a clarity that's worth paying attention to. And yeah, there's probably something to it's an activity, it's getting out of the house, it's something familiar. But I think really there is this clarity as people age where things come into focus that concern the last things. As seniors are always telling me, now is the time I think about heaven, hell, death, and judgment in a particular way. Or I think about some of the seniors I visited who say, well, we're getting all this fancy exercise equipment and kind of new technologies in the senior residence, and they expect that this will attract us. But what we really want is the Mass. We want the Eucharist. We want spiritual activities. We want we want to nourish our spiritual life. And so those young people, sometimes they'll say those kids are getting stuff that they want for themselves, but we're the ones who live here and pay however much money a month to live here. And it's this reality of the things that people want most are not that expensive, are not that complicated, but they take this clarity of vision to isolate and identify that that is what really counts.
Yeah, and I think just maybe one last thought before we open it up for people to have questions and comments. I love the juxtaposition of the elders in Susanna, who tried to entrap her and put her to death because she wouldn't sleep with them, and Noah, who was generative and who built and who protected and who brought everyone in, animals and people, so that they could live. And I think that's a really interesting way for us to think about our own lives and what's our orientation. Is it towards generation and acceptance and trying to help people flourish, or is it towards kind of just like selfish pleasure and what's good for me and what makes me feel good? And I think that's a really, like, there's all those levels in your life where you can think about, how am I reacting to things? Is it in an openness and a focus towards human flourishing, or towards just my own personal self-fulfillment?
That's really good. And also to go back to those same sections about Noah toward the end, and about how he's an example of the generative old age. The Pope says that Noah does not preach and he doesn't complain. And I think that's very interesting, because a lot of people regard old age as a time full of complaint about all different things not being quite right. And so not only about pleasure, but also about kind of self-protection. That's a term that the Franciscan friars of the Renewal use a lot, that part of being selfless and outward going involves letting down our guard a bit and not being so self-protective and concerned about safety and security to the detriment of love and that outward going concern for others. Because in order to be generative, we have to kind of go out of ourselves and out of even our own anxieties and fears in order to meet people in an encounter. And I think that's especially the case with old and young, because there are anxieties and fears on both ends about how that encounter will go. So just that everyone is called to shed some of that self-protectiveness that would hinder the fraternal kind of quality that the Pope is calling us to.
Perfect. That's great. So now this is how we're going to run the next part for those of some of you are old hands at this, but down below, you'll see a reaction button, a little happy face that says reactions underneath that. If you click on that, you'll be able to raise your hand. If you raise your hand, it'll pull you to the top of the queue and I'll be able to find you. And then I'll bring you down and you can make your comment or ask your question or share your story, whatever you would like to do. So I'm going to open up the floor now. I expect to hear from some of you. Yes. Like Peter, I'd expect to hear from you, and Rhonda, come on, I want to hear what you have to say. And yeah. Everyone's just way too silent tonight. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something just to kick it off.
Okay, sorry, okay.
You know,
okay,
I can't find, I didn't underline anything in this document when I read it, but Amanda said about the Holy Father talking about the pleasures of life. And I couldn't help but think he's never been so direct, you know, as that day in, I think that was March of 2022 when he said these words. But it's so hard to explain that to other people. So you can say that, but it doesn't resonate. So I guess my thinking to this group is, what can you do to maybe take those words and have them resonate with people before they become old? Because it applies, you know, I'm old, but I don't consider myself old. So it applies to kind of everybody, I'm going to say, who's healthy and can move around. You know, I think oldness starts when you're kind of bedridden to a certain extent, but at least for those of us who can still drive a car and can still, you know, and we don't have jobs that we are committed to for money, how do we explain those things to people? That it's not all about, maybe that phrase, you quoted it, Amanda, when you first talked, where he talks about pleasures or enjoyments. I couldn't find it quickly before I came on, so it's worth repeating, I think. And it's difficult. I've got, as Nicole, I've got kids and grandkids from 0 to 51 years old, and none of them would believe me if I made that statement. I mean, a few of them may, but not too many. Pretty bad percentage. Go ahead, Amanda.
All right. Well, what immediately comes to mind is experience. People need the experiences in order for these things to resonate. So I think, how did I, as a young person, kind of gain my seriousness and solemnity? Well, I was born with it, actually, but it deepened. It deepened through certain experiences, like traveling with Holocaust survivors and listening to their stories, and realizing the experiences that people had when they were my same age and their lives were much more threatened and things like that. I remember learning stories of saints, especially who were young, and being kind of seized by the gravitas of their lives, like Blessed Jose Luis Sanchez del Rio. I still remember his name. I learned his story when he was 12 because during the war in Mexico, he had the soles of his feet cut off and was proclaiming, "Long live Christ the King." I heard that story when I was 12. I haven't revisited it too many times, but it was seared in my conscience. And I just think that's kind of how it's done, through stories of heroism, saints, heroes, and martyrs, exemplars, and giving people experiences of depth so that they can compare and contrast them with their everyday experiences that might involve some of that corruption of which the Pope speaks. Because as a thinker who I'm very passionate about, Dietrich von Hildebrand, and I see we have Professor Crosby on this call, so I'm very happy to see you here. As Dietrich von Hildebrand always does in his philosophy, he paints the contrast. He says, one man does this, another man does this. It's also quite biblical in style to do that. And in the juxtaposition is brought this clarity of the picture. And, oh, I want to be more like that person and not like this person. And so when you compare this courageous young saint on the one hand and this TikTok celebrity on the other, it becomes clearer and less kind of seductive to model your life after the TikTok star, because you have a different picture. You have what Plato calls in the Republic a vision of another better life.
Okay, great. I'm gonna release you, Peter. I have Pete's iPhone. Pete, I don't know who you are, but I'm gonna bring you down, and maybe you could turn on your video so we can see you. Oh, not a Pete. You don't look like a Pete.
I cannot change that. I'm so sorry, but it is.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Just
you
tell
can
us
tell
what
us
you
your
want to
name.
say. Yeah.
So my name is Shelley Arson, and I just love the reference to Noah, simply because we've just booked a little mini vacation with our two granddaughters who are 6 and 9 to Ark Encounter, which is in Williamstown, Kentucky. And these girls at this age are so great to spend time with, and they're just like sponges, they absorb everything that we share with them. So this will be a great intergenerational time for us to spend and pass on a little bit of wisdom, hopefully. And we're learning together, because apparently this Ark, this replica of the Ark, is amazing. And I'll know more when I come back. But the phrase that really hit me was that Noah's vocation remains ever relevant, and the Holy Patriarch must once again intercede for us. And I've never thought of that. I've never thought of Noah being so far removed from our generation as someone to think of to intercede for us. So gives new meaning. Thank you.
Oh, I really like that. That's a great, a great point, that oftentimes we just focus on the New Testament or the the saints that we know or that are more kind of feel close to us, but there's also so much good material in the Old Testament, the patriarchs and Noah for sure is really interesting. Rhonda, where did you go? I saw you and then you left. You had your hand up. You must come back. I'm gonna find you. Okay, there you are. Okay, you're coming in for gonna add you here. Okay.
And because my husband's it's okay. It's okay. He's busy. He's trying to do some work. So anyways, I don't have any great things to say. I mean, I'm always in awe at these evenings and everything that Amanda, Nicole, and everybody that contributes. The only thing I was thinking is I get epoch or APOC news. And there have been, for months now, one section of the paper that is dedicated to the value of generations, the value of family meals, the celebration of mothers. And it's it's beautiful. It's mostly written by people from the States, but I think there's a desire, people looking, and I think we have to, as the older generation, encourage it even more, like the sacrifices that are involved to get together as a family. And, I always, I have a devotion to Saint Jose Maria Escriva, and his line, the apostolate of the dinner table, so rich, like just conversations. And so that's all. I'm not selling epoch or APOC news, but my husband's correcting me here in the back. But it's a great newspaper, and it has a lot of richness for family and people being together. So
yeah, no, I think actually that's a great point, is finding exemplars or things that are really positive that you can amplify in family life. And sometimes as the couple of the matriarchal patriarchal couple, like the Peters of the world, who have this brood underneath them to bring them together and to facilitate them coming together. I know that in my family, they call our house the main house. So we're the main house, and then they come over here, and they actually, when we're away, they use this house like it's their own special party. Well, I don't know, coming together place, because it's bigger than what they have. And I think that's just such a great thing to facilitate or to foster in your family, is these spaces to come together and celebrate and really connect with each other. Amanda, did you want to say anything about that?
Let's go to Maria first. And
Okay.
Then back to me.
Okay, Maria, we're bringing you down. Okay.
Oh, I was just excuse me, thinking about what Peter had asked about how do we illustrate, like how do we communicate to people the need to take our existence seriously and not just be focused on sort of momentary pleasures. And then one thing that one thing that came to mind was also another anecdote from Man's Search for Meaning, when Viktor Frankl is talking about being a psychotherapist for a few patients who it sounded like they were kind of really in dire straits with their mental health. And one woman had made a suicide attempt and had tried to also kill her young disabled son, not out of malice, but out of this idea of like, if I hate my life, then like he must hate his life too. So we're both just better off dead. But thankfully she wasn't successful with either attempt, and her boy survived and was happy to be alive, and she was now getting mental health treatment. And so Viktor Frankl asked another person in the group, imagine that like tomorrow you are super rich, super healthy, everything is going well for you, you become like a socialite, now you're at the end of your life, tell me what it's looking like. So it's just like a sort of role playing. And this woman talks about how the woman who's doing the role playing talks about how, well, I did lots of drinking and went to lots of parties and had some fun affairs and stuff. And now here at the end of life, I feel so alone and like I just wasted it all. And then he asked the other woman, like, with, the trajectory you're currently going on as like, a mother to this son, what do you think you'll look back on at the end of your life? And she talked about, she had this realization of looking back at the end of life that she could say like, yeah, I took care of my boy, like life was hard for us, but like I took care of him and I loved him. And maybe that's, maybe that really can make things worthwhile. So I guess that just came to mind, because even the idea of like imagining, okay, if I get everything I could possibly want, will that be enough that at the end of my life I can look back and say like, oh yeah, there's no regrets. And I think that helping people see that things that are like a really deep source of anguish can then sometimes show us like where we loved the most deeply, can help people to realize that maybe those things aren't curses, but maybe they just are indications of, how much we loved something or someone, even if they're someone now lost. So yeah.
Beautifully put. Thank you for
that. I really like that. Okay, I'm gonna release you, Maria. Amanda, did you want to comment on that?
Just really beautifully put. Thank you so much for sharing that. What also comes to mind with Peter's question and with your comment there is this Israeli author who I love to read, and Aaron Appelfeld is his name. He's written many books that are very poignant and moving. And what's kind of interesting is that throughout these books, not a lot kind of happens, but there's a lot of movements of the soul. There's a lot of character development. Not a lot of plot, but a lot of kind of interiority being cultivated. And so sometimes throughout the book, the line appears, and I was moved, and he was moved. And I think it's so interesting to read that, because when I read that throughout his novels, I think nobody really speaks that way, or very seldom do people say, this happened, and I was deeply moved. And every time that line came up, I underlined it in the book. And I was like, wow, I was captivated. And then I try it sometimes, like sometimes when I speak, if I'm telling a story and I say, and that really moved me, it has the same effect. People are kind of like, huh, wow, that's not something you hear every day. So I think finding these ways to speak about the experiences that are different in ways that will stand out and really penetrate people's I'd love to take a line from the Pope's piece, but like the normalcy or the predictability of life, that's one thing. And then also about the apostolate of the dinner table, which thank you so much for mentioning that, Rhonda. I always speak also about the apostolate of the Uber or the airplane, or the care home, the retirement home. Really, we can finish the sentence all over the place. John Henry Newman has a beautiful essay called The Apostolate of Personal Influence. Professor Crosby was the first one to introduce that beautiful text to me. And so I think it has to do with asking questions. The questions we ask are very powerful. So when people are at the main house and when you're doing the apostolate of the dinner table, what are the questions that are asked when you go around the table? Because there are better and worse questions to ask at those Thanksgiving table settings or Christmas dinner settings. And I don't know if my mother, who is on this call, recalls the two questions that were asked at the last family gathering when we were up north, but if so, maybe she can share them. She heard them on the radio and then put them to the table. But yeah, I think having a sort of judicious discernment about what questions put to people will evoke the most meaningful answers, whether that's asking about a turning point in their life or something like that.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring you down in a second, Mary, but we used to try and facilitate that with the kids and have questions. And at one point we're asking like, what was the worst thing that happened to you today? And then after a while I was like, this is not something I want to talk about at the dinner table. We're losing that question. So that's a bad question. Don't use that question. Okay, Mary, I'm going to bring you down. Okay. Hello.
Thank you all. I am moved by the sharing on this show tonight, or on this video or Zoom tonight. And I am very touched when Amanda said she was born with these gifts. So I love it. And when I read the Pope's letter, what really stood out for me was he makes it all so natural and simple. The act of sharing and the act of welcoming. And like, who couldn't share and who couldn't welcome? But I think saying that there's practice needed. And I think by practicing, we become better sharers and we become better welcomers. I grew up in a family where there was very little invitation to come for dinner tonight. But if you showed up, dinner was there for you. And there was always space at the table. It seemed to arrive there, like, how could you do that? And it happened, and everyone was included, and everyone was certainly not hungry. And I think the other aspect of his letter was recognizing that wisdom. I'm sometimes told that I'm wise. I thought wise came with old age, but I don't think so. I see some very wise adolescents, teenagers, people in their 20s, and I think it's beautiful. And what I've underlined in the Pope's letter is there's no machines to make peace. Peace is made by hands. And I thought that was lovely.
That is really lovely. Thank you for pointing that out. One thing that you just said that really struck me was that what he says is so simple and natural. And it's true. He really speaks in a language that is accessible to everyone. That I think is really needed for our times. Because sometimes when things are too dense or complicated, people just say, oh, whatever, like I'm not even gonna go there. But because he speaks so simply, it's really can strike the heart.
Yeah, and the soul.
Yes, thank you. John, sorry, do you have something to say?
Very briefly on that, I'd just like to say, do not underestimate the depth of young people as well. And that my challenge would be to ask those penetrating questions, because the better questions will elicit the best from people. And one question that I love to ask young people in order to draw out that kind of depth and break through the superficiality is, what are 3 of the biggest crises you see in the world, for example? And it's amazing what people will come up with and what actually is heavy on people's hearts. Or, for example, who would you most like to pray for? Or who do you think is in greatest need of your prayers? These kinds of questions, maybe they haven't thought of them before, but your question, what would it mean if I told you that your question is just as important, maybe even more, than their answer, because it's formative for them?
Great point. Okay, John, we're bringing you down. What do you have to tell us today? Hi.
A few things struck me. I think one, I wanted to share a game that I play with my son. He loves doing it in the car for traveling. It's called the Ungame, and it's a kind of a prompt system with cards, and you can, I don't know, there are probably 100 or more cards, and it's questions that are really meant to elicit listening and sharing. And it's the game as it's structured is more focused on giving people an opportunity to speak and then other people to listen. But I think the interaction can be really good too. So that's a good kind of tool or resource. I really like it. And it's got some good and deep and meaningful questions. Amanda said that really moved me. That phrase was important. And I had quite a long experience when I was in high school in a program, a great books program. We were reading about a book a week. And one of the professors, I had two teachers who were moderators for those discussions. It's like Socratic discussions. He was an expert in poetry, and there was always a poem matched with the reading for that week. And one of the questions that he almost always asks is, what moved you in that poem? And it was so beautiful to me to see that question asked as a young person, in that education, even though we were reading kind of these heady texts, and it was a good and beautiful experience. It was very enlivening for me. I loved it. But the emotional side of things, to bring in it, what struck you, what really moved you in this poem, what was your kind of emotive response to this, and to be able to share that and to talk about that with people for 20, 30 minutes at the beginning of class. I just
Can I
thought
ask you a
was
question
so,
on that?
sure, yeah.
So did you find that it was a different experience if it was a girl or a boy or a young man or a young woman responding?
No, no, I
Okay,
don't think so. No, I mean, I think people were pretty open. There was a lot of trust in the groups that were there. I mean, it was maybe 20 students who were all, you almost always 14, and then through the 4 years up to like 18. And so we knew each other pretty well. And I didn't see a huge amount of difference. People were my experience, and I've taught some classes and led with poetry and done Socratic discussions myself. I think people tend to be pretty open. I don't know, youth at that age, if there are people who they know and respect, who are leading the discussions and are not asking them because they have to ask them, but because they really want to know. They want to help share these human experiences and reflections. I think I've seen that in my own teaching, and I experienced that. It was such a meaningful part of my education. One of the quotes, and this I guess ties together reasonably well, it's towards the end of Pope Francis's remarks. He says, "The new generations expect from us, the elderly, a word that is prophecy, that opens the doors to new perspectives outside the carefree world of corruption, of the habit of corrupt things." And in many moments of my life, I would say I've experienced that, but especially in that class at that age, and even when I've taught, it's funny, in that same kind of program, they had a philosophy class for children, kids like in grade 3 through 6, and I was able to teach some of those classes. And the responses that I got from these children on things were so beautiful. And being led as a person who's a teenager and then a young adult, I guess, having people, this Dr. James Taylor, he's now passed away. He later became a monk after I was familiar with him, monk Porphyrios, I think. Yeah, that's right. But him and Steve Bertucci with this Great Books program, having them who obviously knew and loved these great works of literature and philosophy and everything, opening them up with us, asking questions and having an opportunity to respond. And everybody took each other seriously. It was such a life-giving experience, and it was beautiful. And I'm just really appreciative of that. And yeah, I just thought I'd share on those few things. So thanks.
great. Thank you so much. And let's bring you down. I love the whole idea of great books and exposing your kids to great books, because I think that is such a great way to learn and to expand your horizons. Okay, hi Annette, and I recognize someone in this feed here. Hey, how are you?
My mom.
Okay, hi Mom, how are you?
Hi. I recruited her into this book club.
Okay, okay.
So I just thought this was, everyone thinks of Pope Francis as this kind of, hey, everybody have mercy. And what I found interesting was how he has gone after in this writing, in this particular audience, like the central ethos of our time, which is the you're okay, I'm okay. And that you're okay, I'm okay was the kind of gateway into the corruption that ultimately led to the need to start over. And that the remedy is sacrifice, which, you know, Jordan Peterson now has built a whole career on telling people to make their bed and make sacrifices, which is a very, very like, you know, make your bed and pick up a cross.
Yeah, why couldn't I make a ton of money telling
it could have been you, Nicole.
Yes, make your bed.
And
she's gonna go try and collect from her 7 children after this call.
And I think this is really interesting because he talks in that other section about that it's not school of community, but it's that kind of pact of learning and group of learning, and you know, making your bed used to be something. Anyway, I guess the point I'm making is that Amanda spoke earlier about how, you know, people think that older people sometimes complain, but I think they see certain habits that build certain virtues that are kind of abandoned now, and they can remind us of that. That's the value of having these connections, and not having them can let us get lost in our "I'm okay, you're okay" ethos. And anyway, yes, and if you're Jordan Peterson, you can bring all those things back to great effect. But anyway, I guess I was just struck by Pope Francis talking about this in this way, and really giving a role to older people to rescue all the youngins, because I think our society, you know, if we compare it to other cultures, has not I guess seen the value, like doesn't value the old the way it values the young, even though the habits of the young, when you have them too long, can make you not an impressive older person, as he also talks about in this encyclical. So those are my ramblings that I wanted to contribute. Thank you both for all your work.
I really like that. I think that's really important to point out, is the value that we don't place on the elderly, and how we sometimes our focus is on youth and young, and what are we doing for the young, and we don't think about what are we doing for people at the other end of the life spectrum. But Amanda, you had this great experience on Sunday, and I really want you to tell everyone about it, because anyways, the pictures were beautiful, the event was beautiful, and it was really something, once in a lifetime experience for many people. So why don't you tell us about it? That's
right. Well, people always talk about my travels as being once in a lifetime experiences, but I have a lot of them. So just because we call something of a lifetime doesn't mean it's the only one or the last one. But what I organized on Sunday was a mass of a lifetime for residents at a senior's home. And the idea was also partly inspired by a quotation of Dietrich von Hildebrand, who in his little book, which has been published under the title Beauty in the Light of the Redemption, says, wherever Christ is made known, there nothing can be beautiful enough. And I thought, what is it if we take that seriously, if we take that to heart, then how elaborate and how extensive would the Mass be in any context? And it was also partly inspired by hearing from seniors that they very often, if they have Mass in their residence, have it only once a month, 20 minutes, priest comes in and out, no music, very basic Mass kit. And so I attended one of those masses, and it was exactly as described. And I thought, okay, time to make it extra special for these senior residents. And so thankfully, St. John's Choir School in my hometown sent 12 students to compose a beautiful choir. We had overflow seating in this retirement residence. It's a Catholic residence, but they had not used the chapel very much. And it was absolutely beautiful. The priest took his time. It was a Sunday Mass rather than a weekday Mass. And I also quoted the early Christians who Pope Benedict writes about in his essay on the meaning of Sunday. The early Christians said, without the day of the Lord, we cannot live. And so I tried to give that urgency and that conviction to these seniors, and also just told them, like, this is for you. This is for God, but it's also for you. And this is something within our ability. Like, we can bring people together, young and old, and putting the grade 7 to 12 students together with these seniors, and then getting a really, really fancy cake for them to share. They all stuck around.
It was really fancy.
It was really fancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it fit with the gospel about the wedding feast and all of this too, and how yeah, it was just very beautiful. Yeah, so these are the kinds of things that we can do. We can create occasions for people to come together and be in the same room. They don't need to be complicated or expensive. They just need to happen. And if you have any, like, for example, if you have a home, you can host such a gathering. Or if you have a parish group, you can create such a gathering between one of the younger ministries and one of the older ministries. Yeah, so we have these groups within parishes, but sometimes they're a little bit siloed. I love one thing, well, I love many things that John shared, but in particular, one thing that struck me is how you kind of wrapped up the remarks saying that everyone took each other so seriously. I love that. This is going to be the second line I want to leave with you, in addition to, and I was deeply moved. Everyone took each other seriously. Honestly, like, the older people in my life in particular, when I visit them and I leave them, I'm swelling with a kind of affirmation in my soul that rejoices in how seriously I was taken. Oh, the good that I am able to do is because I feel like I was taken seriously. A good teacher, a good mentor, a good priest, a good parent will take the other person seriously. So I just love that. And then lastly, in this little roundup of thoughts that came to my mind, is this point about prophecy that opens the doors to new perspectives. Now, I've been speaking in churches almost every day, every evening, about euthanasia, and many people are asking why people desire euthanasia. And we know from the statistics that one of the leading reasons is because people say that they've lost the ability to participate in activities that make life meaningful. They've lost the ability to participate in activities that make life meaningful. What prophecy do the young look for in the old? We look for a prophecy that in aging, we will not lose the most meaningful activities that make life worth living. So how can you model, first of all, how can you find out for yourself, for your own sake and for your own good, what activities you will be able to do through your whole life long? And sometimes that activity becomes as simple as loving and being loved. And until we solidify and anchor our identity in the ultimate human vocation, which is to love and be loved, then we will, until we find that, then our existence is precarious, because all our talents, like Peter was saying, all our ability for physical movement and to be mobile and to be active, all these things can fade away. But Christ is present in the Blessed Sacrament. And I spoke about this in a church the other day. What meaningful activities is he doing in the tabernacle? What meaningful activities does Christ have in the tabernacle to do that he can exercise? He simply is present. And we can learn the true presence of persons through the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, and be reminded every time we genuflect and every time we kneel of our ultimate vocation to love and be loved, which is never taken from us, even if we are in anguish, dying, agony, lose our capacity, don't have our memory. That fundamental human vocation persists.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that, because I've been reading a lot of Robert Spaeman lately in preparation for another thing that I'm doing. And he says very clearly that that is one of the things that individuals, persons with disabilities bring to the world, because they strip away from us this false idea that we are important or valuable because of what we can do. And it's really like who you are, because you are a person, and that whole idea of love and be loved, like that really is a witness to the world of what's important. And I see that Maria said that as well, that she said also applies deeply to people with disabilities of all ages. And I think that's true. All of us at some point in time in our life, frankly, are going to be relying on someone else to help us for something. We are not going to be able to be this autonomous, do it all ourselves. We all come to that point in our lives, but we don't lose the ability to be loved and to love. Okay, I'm just going to read this. I'm going to read this, Amanda, because it's your mom, so you can't read it. She says, one of the ladies on Sunday shared with me that she loved the mass and the social that followed. She said her family has moved away. When they come to visit, they just want photos with her. But she said what that is at least something. And then they go out to the mountains or some nice park to do it. She would like to have more of a connection, but doesn't know how she could go about it with the busyness of their lives. So I think that is a challenge. That is a challenge for us as we get older. How do we connect with our grandchildren when their lives are very busy and revolving around sports and things like that? And maybe it's the Sunday dinner apostolate where you're saying we're going to get together and spend Sundays together, and that's going to be a kind of a protected time. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Rhonda, I know you had your hand up before. Did you want to come down and say something?
Yeah, I just, I don't know, I found this session very emotional. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I was listening to John and Amanda, there's a richness. Well, first of all, there is a challenge sometimes, even when you get together, that people are hesitant to talk about certain things. When I was young, growing up, I mean, we had major arguments and everything, and everybody left the table like friendly, but people are hesitant to do that now, to get into anything deep. And the richness of the things that we're talking about, and I'm just talking personally, it's only through the way my life went that I started thinking about life. And I was in my mid-30s, like almost, like late 30s. And it's a richness that is a gift that we have. Not that we know everything, but, like when you say you talk to your grandchildren, somebody talked about virtue. I'm trying to teach my 4-year-old granddaughter order, because I'm thinking, okay, like that's just a little like something. They're not religious in their homes. So and I'd say, well, it gives you peace. But anyways, I just thought, it's we have to pray a lot. I'm talking personally, and how do we get our children and our grandchildren to really think about things? Just like, I just remember this young girl asking me, what did you think about, what was important to you for the man that you married? And I burst out laughing, and I said, I'm sorry, but I didn't even think about what characters. I didn't know. We had to learn as we were, it was hard work, but those are important things. So just the whole idea of like your life, and listening to the elderly. Anyways, I'm nattering, but that was all I wanted to say. Just it's a challenge,
For sure. It's the challenge of our time to bring meaning to life. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap it up.
All right. Well, thank you so much to each and every one of you for your presence here, for joining us, for your contributions. As always, you can email us if thoughts occur to you after the session, feedback on how to make it better. And we're happy to grow into this together. One last kind of comment on the substance of the meeting, and that is find a reason to celebrate as an excuse to get together. So there are so many thematic days. Like for some reason it will be National Ice Cream Day, and then it will be Sunflower Day, and then it will be Milkshake Day, and then this is in addition to the liturgical calendar of real feasts, right? And so there are so many reasons to say, I've got to meet you for an ice cream because it's National Ice Cream Day, or I've got to give you a rose because it's the Feast of Saint Therese, or whatever it might be. But if you thought every day, how could I celebrate someone in this kind of thematic way, there's always a reason for the feast. There's always something you can do. So just make the basis around celebration, because as Cardinal Ratzinger said, the fundamental tenor of our faith is affirmatory. Faith lives on affirmation, and the confidence that we have in one another grows up in affirmation as well. So with this, we're just going to close in a prayer, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. And just pay attention to those dates. We have a calendar of dates, and we do skip weeks sometimes for various holidays as well. And so it's not always an exact cycle, but all the dates are listed on the website. All right. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, we give you thanks for the opportunity to come together in all of our respective places to unite in a common purpose, resolute and determined to humanize the culture, to explore Holy Father's teaching on the meaning and value of old age. Help us to affirm others, to see the value that others don't see, to be creative and audacious and outward going, to love with your own heart, and to do everything to glorify you, knowing that you are glorified when we love one another through presence, accompaniment, and faithful, steadfast standing by. So I ask you to bless everyone here and their families. And till next time. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you.
And next time is next Monday. It's just 1 week. So in October, we were kind of back to back because of Thanksgiving and some other things. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you
Okay,
so
awesome.
much.
Thank you. It's really great. Really
Send us emails. We
lifts
like
us
it.
up to spend time with you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. God bless you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.